So I got to meet Paul Wethrich, who's playing Joseph Smith. He was in Witnesses, so he's worked with the team.
Brothers, welcome. Who are you and what brings you to Kirtland?
We're looking for the prophet Joseph. We were told. You're him, aren't you?
I am.
He came up to me afterwards and he was like, it was so nice to have you, because on the last film, Witnesses, it was about everybody abandoning me.
I hope you're not disappointed. Some are.
No, of course not. You're exactly as we imagined.
I doubt that. But then again, I did not choose this. God chose me.
His wife had expressed, I don't know who they're going to get to play a Brigham, because Paul had been such a critical player, not only in the film for Witnesses, but in being a proponent of the message of the show.
It comes unbidden. He opens his mouth and the Lord fills it.
Certainly something fills it.
And he told me that he went home the first day. I called up his wife. He's like, they found the guy. I'm not worried at all.
Your gift is of God.
And as we got to know each other, it was really sweet and tender, because I got to feel his testimony of the prophet Joseph.
You are most welcome by my side anytime, Brigham.
Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints represent a faith practiced by millions, a faith which has also inspired its share of controversy.
I think if you look at Brigham Young's whole life, well, it's a conundrum.
I'm Camry Bagley-Fox, and together with John Wilson and Professor Daniel Peterson, we work to uncover unexpected twists in the character of a man that we thought we already knew. So in our last episode, we were talking about Brigham Young as a young man and his search for truth.
And his desire, which I think is really fascinating, based just off reading the Bible, a desire to meet a prophet is something he said that he had from a young age.
Yeah, he says something interesting. He says, I felt in those days that if I could see the face of a prophet, such as had lived on the earth in former times, a man that had revelations, to whom the heavens were opened, who knew God and his character, I would freely circumscribe the earth on my hands and knees.
Oh, that's awesome, because he does get to meet a prophet, right? Yeah. And he meets Joseph and they speak in tongues.
And Joseph receives a revelation at that point that's recorded in section 46, and the Lord encourages the seeking of spiritual gifts with the caveat of remembering to pursue them for the purpose they were intended.
Right, which was not rolling around on the floor trying to impress everybody else that you got the Spirit.
As cool as that is.
So I've been doing it wrong.
You've been doing it wrong.
But we did leave last episode on a bit of a cliffhanger. We brought Brigham to the point where he met Joseph in the woods, and then they were invited home and had this experience in the evening. But I wanted to read Brigham's own words about that evening. So Brigham said, quote, "The prophet called upon me to pray. In my prayer, I spoke in tongues." But then he notes something interesting. This was the first time Joseph had heard this gift among the brethren. Crazy. Next, he says, as soon as we arose from our knees, the brethren flocked around Joseph and asked his opinion concerning the gift of tongues that was upon me. And Joseph says, it was the pure Adamic language that had been spoken.
Okay, so I actually have a little bit more on this from my interview with Casey Griffiths that I'd love to share with you.
I should mention that first meeting where Brigham speaks in tongues, according to Brigham, Joseph took him aside privately years later and said, "Do you know what you said that night?" And Brigham Young said, "I don't." And Joseph Smith told him, "You prophesied in the Adamic language that you would take my place."
Really?
As president of the church, yeah. So again, this is all being filtered through Brigham, but it does seem like, well, an impression was made the first time, but Joseph Smith also allowed the relationship to develop organically, where it just became clear to people that Brigham was really good at organizing, inspiring people, and that he could get things done.
That's amazing. Which reminds me of another quote that I also brought up about the same topic.
Another quote.
Another quote. Okay. Let me share it with you. It's not as cool as your interview, but it does add some more light to the situation. So Brigham talks about the reaction initially, and he says that some said to him that they expected that Joseph would condemn the gift. But Joseph said, quote, "No, it is of God," and then says something profound. He says, "The time will come when Brother Brigham Young will preside over this church." And the latter part was expressed without Brigham in the company, but like, holy moly.
Yeah, I've never heard that quote. You think that would have been like used as fodder in the great debate, and maybe it was, I don't know. But
Later on, though, Ron Esplin has something to say about that, and he says that there are at least two sources for that, Joseph Young and Heber C. Kimball, who later said that they heard that when Brigham was out of the room.
Okay.
And Ron also says something else interesting. He says, it is possible that this comment or some other foreshadowing imparted to Brigham a sense of destiny and special responsibility that encouraged and focused him in his extraordinary devotion to learn all that he could at the feet of Joseph. I mean, Brigham comments several times that he watches Joseph carefully to watch how he leads, what he says, what he does. He listens carefully. He's always trying to be there. You can imagine if you had some inkling that you were going to step into those shoes, you'd be watching very, very carefully to see how it's done.
Dan, with all this happening in such a short period of time and so clearly and so prophetically, is Brigham now welcomed into the church as the successor to Joseph, brought in at his right hand, taught and groomed and that kind of a thing?
No, curiously, he's not. I mean, you can talk about an inner circle. Brigham wasn't in it, not yet. You have Oliver Cowdery, who's an early convert. You have Hiram Smith, Joseph's brother. They're clearly in the inner circle. And then later on, there's some later converts, I mean, still early, but Sidney Rigdon, Newell K. Whitney, and they become members of the inner circle, but Brigham does not. In fact, the behavior is a little bit different. You might expect that he would have been invited to stay in Kirtland, join the School of the Prophets. He's not.
Really?
He's not even told to go back to Mendon, get his family, and move to Kirtland. He is told to go back to Mendon and preach the gospel and encourage people to gather to Kirtland.
And how does he react to that?
I think that's very instructive because I think, Brigham was so thrilled to meet the prophet.
He had to have been.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he'd wanted to meet someone. Now he's convinced he has. He's met a prophet of God. And yet he bends the knee in a sense. I mean, Brigham Young has never been described as a weak personality. He's been accused of almost everything else under the sun, but not that. Yet he takes that meekly from Joseph and he goes back to Mendon and he does exactly what he was told to do. He seems always, it's a leitmotif in his life, I think, to want to follow the prophet, to obey the prophet. He does what Joseph asks him to do. Even though he's so thrilled to have come into the presence of a prophet.
In spite of having his dream come true, and I'm sure he was like, what, I have to go?
Mm-hmm.
This is characteristic of the rest of his life, not just during the time that Joseph is alive, but throughout Brigham's life. He's trying to do what Joseph would have done, what Joseph wanted done.
Do we know, in Joseph's words, what he thought of Brigham?
Not really. I think later on you get some hints of that, and you see by his actions that he trusts Brigham. He relies upon him. Brigham is older than Joseph. Brigham is 31. Joseph's not quite 27. And Brigham's knocked around a little bit more in some ways. He's had a hard life. But he sees in Joseph clearly an untutored young man who can receive revelation, has the courage to face the world and be a prophet, and that impresses him.
Kind of in a way has that experience of learning that that's the instrumentality through which God does his kingdom. It's the untrained, the unlearned, the weak things of the world.
Yeah, it's not some learned scholar, it's not even a grizzled veteran or anything like that. It's a man younger than he is.
Yeah, that the willingness is much more important than the
expertise,
qualifications of the world.
We do have some of Brigham's specific words about how he felt about Joseph, even at the early days. This quote, Brigham says, "When I saw Joseph Smith, he took heaven, figuratively speaking, and brought it down to earth. And he took earth and he brought it up. And he opened up in plainness and simplicity the things of God. And that is the beauty of his mission."
I think it's a wonderful quote, and it seems to me that it's kind of a characterization of the gospel as a whole. It brings heaven down, makes it comprehensible and in some ways simple, and brings humans up. God becomes more like us. He's relatable. He really is our Father. And we have the opportunity to be raised up, exalted to be like him.
I love that imagery.
Yeah, that's powerful language.
Aspect.
But I'm sure it's brilliant.
It had something to do with the witness story.
Must not have been that important.
Oh, wow. Look at this.
I love this brick.
I think one of the...
Love this puddle.
Whew, what a day, what a day.
Yeah, it's been so cool getting to be here where so much history happened.
Yeah.
There is one more thing I want to talk about. Johnny, could we ask you to impersonate Brigham just a little bit?
Do you see him as a Brigham?
I don't know. Can't really imagine.
I don't.
I'll give it a shot. And this is Brigham speaking about Joseph?
Yes.
Okay. So Brigham said, "The Lord had his eyes upon Joseph Smith, and upon his father, and upon his father's father, and upon their progenitors clear back to Abraham. And from Abraham to the flood, and from the flood to Enoch, and from Enoch to Adam, he has watched that family and that blood as it is circulated from its fountain to the birth of that man. He was foreordained in eternity to preside over this last dispensation. The Lord called upon his servant Joseph Smith Jr. when he was but a boy to lay the foundation of his kingdom for the last time." And now Brigham's talking about himself. He said, "When I first heard him preach, he brought heaven and earth together. I can truly say that I invariably found him to be all that any people could require a true prophet to be, and that a better man could not be. Though he had his weaknesses, and what man has ever lived upon this earth who had none, I feel like shouting hallelujah all the time when I think that I ever knew the prophet Joseph Smith."
I think that last quote especially sort of captures Brigham Young's attitude toward Joseph Smith.
Yeah, it's clear from those words that there was a profound sense of love, admiration, devotion to the cause, just all of those things wrapped up into, I think, that statement.
From a guy, Brigham Young, who did not lightly give his devotion to someone. He was a strong personality in his own right.
Born of, and we've already talked about this, but born of his testimony,
Yeah.
that he had labored to receive, a witness for himself that this was the work and Joseph was the man.
I love that.